Hey everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan, and today we are continuing our How to LS Swap Something series with part 13, wiring. So what I mean by wiring is wiring your LS into your older car. This isn't like trying to wire the car so like the brake lights work. I'm assuming those are going to already work from the old car, your headlights, dome lights, something like that. That is wiring, a whole car, your old car. I'm just showing you how to wire the engine to get it to run in your LS swap. All the rest of the wiring, like if you're building a car from scratch, is going to be on you because that's going to be bespoke to different makes and models. So everything I've shown here is going to apply to all LS swaps that are for an older vehicle. All the principles are going to apply. Your harness might just look a little different because you need it to match exactly the engine, age, reluctor wheel, and ECM you have. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and thank our sponsor, Summit Racing. Summit Racing has been making this series happen by sending me all kinds of amazing parts. They've been a fantastic sponsor. They're an amazing website and just a true pleasure to deal with. So make sure you sponsor them for sponsoring me by buying all your speed parts at summitracing.com. So this video is a long one. I wanted to keep everything nice and included inside of one video so you could just sit down and find the information you need. You don't have to keep clicking from video to video. I wanted to make this all one big thing. This is how you definitively wire your LS to run in your LS swap. It's exactly this way, and if you have any questions, you can either go to our website, twocarpros.com, where I'll be happy to answer your question there, or you can leave them down below and I'll do my best to get to them, but I do get a lot of comments. I can't guarantee I'll see them all. So sit back and relax, and by the end of this video, you too will know how to wire an LS and an old hot rod. Let's go. Before we get started, let's go back to school a little bit to learn how we are going to put this whole thing together. Just like we did on our fuel system, I've drawn out a very rough diagram of how it should look. So when we are wiring this car, I want you to think of it as two separate cars. Don't think of it as the whole thing is Bel Air. I want you to think of it as Bel Air is over here, and then the rest of it is '01 Silverado. And the only thing they really share is the starter and technically the alternator. So let's run it down on how we're going to wire this. The first place we're going to start is our battery. So that's pretty easy. That's in the trunk. That's going to be fed through a mega fuse, which I'll show you later. This big, I think it's a 1-gauge wire, is going to feed all the way to the starter. So that starter lug, you'll see that later. That's where that's going to join. And then power from that is going to go to our ECM. Our alternator is also going to be connected to our starter. That way the alternator can feed charge to the entire system. And then off of the starter, we're going to have a smaller wire that goes to our key. So the key is the key, to the rest of the Bel Air, all the Bel Air systems. So the key is going to feed the fuse block that's stock in the Bel Air. That's from 1955. We didn't do anything with that. And that's going to feed lights and accessories. That's going to be like dome lights, headlights, things like that. So how does the ECM know that we're starting the vehicle? Well, that's easy. Because the key has a purple wire coming off of it, and that feeds into your neutral safety switch, which is on the bottom of our awesome Summit Racing shifter, and that feeds to the trigger on the starter, so that'll crank and crank and crank and crank. When the ECM sees that via its crankshaft positioning sensor, it knows the engine's turning over and it's going to start, and it's going to start feeding it some sort of spark. But how does the ECM know to turn on? Well, we're going to put this in. It's a signal switch. On LS systems, you need something that keeps the ECM hot when cranking, hot when keys on, and off when keys off. I couldn't find anything underneath the dash that did that. Maybe you can. So I'm just going to put in a physical switch. That is usually the most common way to do that, and that just needs some form of steady power. So I've chosen the back of the alternator. Alternatively, you could very easily put it off the battery or anywhere else that has decent steady power. It doesn't have to be a lot either. It's a very small signal. It's not making anything happen. So the ECM, we have grounded the back of the block as long as it's a good ground, as well as the fuse blocks. That's already grounded. Everything else is grounded as well. Same with the battery. That's what this symbol means. It means grounded to frame or engine block, because the engine is also grounded to the frame. Same difference. And then out of the ECM, we have all those gaggles of wires. I've only drawn 3 because I don't want to be here all day and I'd run out of colors. So that will feed all of our sensors, our plugs, injectors, and our fuel pump. And I will show you how to wire and plug in each and every one of those. So basically all this is Bel Air. That's all Bel Air. And then All of this, including the starter, is 01 Silverado. Basically the only thing that they share is going to be the starter. So don't worry too much about any kind of crossover. It's much easier to think of this as two separate cars than to think of it as one. So ECM, 01 Silverado, all the signals and sensors to make that work. Key, neutral, safety switch, fuse, blocks, lights, and accessories. That's going to be 55 Bel Air or whatever you're LS swapping. So with that explanation out of the way, now we can jump in. So now we can worry about our battery cables. This is really the first part of how to wire a car from basically scratch. And luckily our friends at Summit Racing are here to help us out. There's our part number. They are a really nice kind of pre-made battery cable kit. So this is made pretty much for running from the back of your hot rod to the front, because we have our battery in the trunk like a true hot rod should. So it comes with 20 feet, I believe, of the red wire and 3 feet of the black, I believe? Yes, which is typically about how much you need, because we're just going to ground this to our frame, so it's not like you need a whole ton of this. And it already has the ends for the battery terminals already on. That's pretty cool. That saves us a step, hey. And it came with other terminal ends and the correct colored heat shrink and some Adele clips. This is a neat kit. I like that a lot. Very cool. And of course, the main star of the show, this is going to run from our battery to our starter. So let's get started. So we're at the rear of our car. If a previous episode, we mounted our battery, link down below in the description of the whole series where you can see that done. And I think it looks really good right here. And we already did our holes. So those are done. And what I like to do first is run our negative. So I have our negative here. I'm going to put it on the terminal, and you can clock it however which way you like. I think straight like this with the, running parallel with the car is what looks best, but of course that can differ. And if you have kept your battery in under the hood where most cars have it, that's totally fine too. That's pretty cool as well. It's actually even easier because your red cable won't have to be so long, but I promise the steps are exactly the same. So what we can do is take our negative, and we're going to feed it, in my case, into our left hole that we already punched out of our body. Just be careful, metal sharp. There we go. Yeah, see, check that out. I think that looks really cool. It has this nice long, sort of C shape. And then we can go underneath the vehicle. So now we're on the underside of the car. Here is our frame, and this is what you want to mount it to. This is where you want the ground to go, on the frame, not like a little bracket or something chintzy, something beefy like this right here. Looks absolutely perfect. It's already a piece that holds on a really big piece of the bumper, and it goes to the frame, and it's a nice big diameter, so a lot of amperage can go through there, no problem. So what we can do is grab our cord here, and we're just going to put it up there and measure it out where I think it would go, and always leave yourself a little more than you might think. And you can see I've already marked it with my gold marker. So that's where I'm going to cut it. I'm going to put the end on. That'll put it kind of like this. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So we are ready to cut and solder the end on. So I have our negative cable and my vise here. I've got some compound cutters that are basically designed to do this, and our gold mark. I'm going to go ahead and cut it. Link down below in the description to these bad boys. Trust me, they'll make your life a lot easier. Alternatively, you could just use a regular pair of wire cutters. It just might take you a while. And just cut the strands of copper individually. There you go. See, not so bad. So on this insulation, it's really easy. Just take a nice sharp box cutter, go about an inch back on that insulation, and then just work your way around. And there we go. Insulation's off there. It's just the bare copper exposed. Now we're ready for our end. So here's one of our end connectors that came with our kit. And we can just insert our cable into there, making sure none of the copper strands get away from us. You want them all to go inside of that connector. Just like that. Very nice. And what we're going to do, there's a couple different ways to do this. You can crimp this with a crimping tool, but I don't have that. There's a hydraulic tool, but I extra don't have that. What I do have, though, is some solder and a butane torch. And make sure you've already slid your heat shrink on all the way to the other end of the cable. I'm going to turn the gas on, hit it. What we're going to do is heat this up. And we're going to keep heating this up until it's nice and warm. We're just going to keep going around our fitting here. And be careful, it is fire. And once we think it's gotten hot enough, we can just see if our solder should melt on in there. And it looks like it's doing it. Keep your fingers away from the hot solder. And a well-ventilated room would be good. Keep going around, and you just want to solder this in here so that way it can't come out. We're just going to keep putting solder in there until it is nice and full, and you'll be able to see that. Don't mind the insulation, we can take it out later. Keep feeding the solder until it kind of looks like that, where it's kind of bubbling over a little bit. I think that's pretty good. So now that our connection is nice and full of solder, we're gonna wait. Don't handle this hot. So now that it's completely cooled to the touch, we can go ahead and give it a couple pulls. And it's not going anywhere, so that is excellent. All right, I've cut some of the, bubblies away from the insulation. What you can do is grab our heat shrink from the other end of our cable, and we're just gonna slide that bad boy on. You don't want it too far down like this, but it's gotta be on the metal as well as the insulation so that it can hold itself, and you can either use like a hair dryer, a lighter, a heat gun. I'm gonna use the butane torch again, because fire's fun. Just hold it far away until it starts shrinking. You don't want to burn it. Make sure it's where we want it, and it is. And there we go. I think that looks quite nice. So here are our holes where we're going to be feeding our battery cable. And since we're doing the negative, might as well just put them in now so we don't forget. That'd be a bummer. A little loose, but that's okay. And I think they fit pretty darn well. So we can grab our negative. And again, I'm going to put it back where I want it. Kind of running parallel with the car. Nice and snug. Like that. And then we can feed it through our grommet. Might take a little finagling. Yeah, alright. That looks really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and remove our nut and bolt combo from our frame. Mine happens to be 11/16. Yours might be different. Well, that was fairly easy. And what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to clean this surface right here for maximum connectivity. So you can use some sandpaper or a grinder or something like that. All you want to do is clean. See all this crud? And there's like a little bit of paint on there too. We kind of want that off there. Yeah, that looks a lot better. So I remove that bracket. We're going to clean this up as well. So to clean this up, I'm going to do the other side of the bracket as well. We want as much connectivity as possible. Alternatively, you could just use something like this that you'd only really need to do the one side on, but we're trying to be as thorough as possible. So I have a whole new nut and bolt assembly, a washer on the bolt side. I'm going to feed that through. So then we can put on our negative battery terminal cable, making sure that lies nice and flush. You don't want it to be on some piece of metal and it not making full contact. And then we can grab a washer and a lock washer, and finally our nut. And tighten that on down. That looks pretty darn good to me. So our negative is all done, but before we move on to the positive, let's disconnect it from the battery. Now we can remove our negative battery terminal cable because we're going to be working on the positive, and well, you don't want to ground anything out unduly or not on purpose because that can cause all kinds of bad things. We're just going to leave that down and in such a way it can't accidentally touch while we're working. So now I have our positive cable, and we can basically do what we did before, making sure you never touch the positive to the negative, not even, accidentally. You can even put like a terry towel over this just to make sure it's impossible. It's not a bad call. So we're just gonna put something just kind of protects over the negative post there, and then it's impossible to accidentally touch it. So then we can grab our positive, put it on our battery, and tighten that down. And again, I kind of like it pointed like this. You could angle it if you want, and that's kind of the art. It's kind of the fun of building a hot rod. It is completely and totally up to you. There are millions of different ways to do all kinds of things, and that's one of them. So now I'm going to feed it through, and it might be a little laborious, a little tedious, but inch by inch, we'll get it there. So there we go. That's what kind of like our final product is going to look like. I'm not going to put the negative on to show you, but this gives you a rough estimation, and I really like that. I think that looks really neat. You could even have mounted your battery long ways and done it that way, but again, that's all up to you. That's part of the art, that's part of the fun. I think it looks pretty darn good like this. So here is where our positive cable comes out. It comes down. I zip tied it to the filler neck and then across, keep it away from anything that moves, anything that gets hot, like the exhaust. And then I had it, it's kind of tough to see. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. I kind of have it hugging the top of the gas tank behind the straps so it's in place. Yeah, check that out. That looks great. And then I zip tied it to our fuel line. Don't really have a problem with that. Again, keeping it away from the suspension. There's plenty of room right here. And then you can see, again, away from anything hot. Just calved it with our fuel line. But then I have it Y off from our fuel line and go on our transmission crossmember because we want to keep it away from the exhaust. It's not there yet, but it will be at some point. And then I have it zip tied here, laid on top of our transmission, up on the inside of our dip tube. It's actually going to hold it in place for us. Looks really nice. And then it's going to come this way, again on the inside of the exhaust just there, above our starter, and then I have it coming down and around. So it's about 2 feet, 2.5 feet too long, something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that and terminate it just like the other side. Again, we have our cable going on top of our transmission. I've already cut and terminated the end, and I have it wired to our starter, and on our Summit branded starter, its post is right there. Just make sure when you are doing this for real, when you're wiring it up, that this end doesn't touch the trigger, which is what that like black Allen screw is. You want to keep those two away from each other, maybe even put a rubber boot on there, good idea. But for mock-up purposes, our power wire is all done. So before we go any further in wiring our car, let's go ahead and talk about something you really should put in your car. You don't technically have to have one, but you should have one. It will prevent your car from burning to the ground, and I'm pretty sure you need one to even drag race. And that's one of these. And what this does is go in line of your positive battery cable, and in the event that the positive side grounds out somewhere along the body or under the hood or something, this fuse goes pop and your car is, you know, the ignition gets cut and everything gets cut off, but it doesn't burn to the ground. This is really, really essential, and I will leave a link down below in the description to it, as well as these wire lugs. And we have 1 gauge wire, and this is, I believe, it's 5/16 hole, and that will go on there just fine. So we just have to go ahead and put this in line. I already showed you how to use a blowtorch to solder that in. It's kind of an older way. The new way is to use one of these, which actually crushes the connector on there, and it works very well. So let's head over to the car and do it. And for those of you wondering, this kit actually came after we wired up the positive side for the car. You should do it when you put the battery in and you're running the positive cable, but you can put it in after the fact, like we're gonna do right now. All right, I've already removed our battery and our trunk of our Bel Air here, and you can see kind of where it was. And I know putting a little bit extra length in here is going to force this forward, but I have plenty of adjustability and I can zip tie that up later. So I'm just going to leave it at stock length. Alternatively, you could take out about, oh, I don't know, 2.5 inches or so to accommodate for that length if you want it perfectly on the money. So what we can do is take some wire cutters. There we go. All right, so here's our battery cable end I just removed out of our Bel Air. I'm going to show you how to do it on the table, and I'm going to do it off camera on the car side because it's a little easier to show you while it's on the table and, you know, not necessarily in a car. So what we're going to need is our cable, our wire lug end, some heat shrink, sharp razor blade, and our crimping tool. And all the links are located down below in the description to these awesome stuff. So what we need to do first, and truth be told, you could definitely slide that over the end, but it is good practice to always put on your heat shrink first. It's always a bummer to do something and then forget the heat shrink. I'll just slide that down as far as possible. So step 2 on our end here, we can see our cable end. We can see just about how far that's going to go in, and about right there where the end of my thumb is. I can just mark that. You could use a pen or something as well, or undercut it and cut it again if you aren't sure. And what we can do is just take our nice sharp box cutter and cut all the way down to the copper strands. You might have to go around once or twice. Just pull off the end there and expose our wires. Now, you just want to make sure that it's going to fit all the way down in there. And it is. That's actually pretty good. It's a little high on this side. I'm going to take off just a smidge more, because the heat shrink's really going to hide, you know, these wires, and I want as much contact as possible. Oh, there we go. That's much better. I'm much more comfortable with that. And we can test, we can kind of hover over it and see that it's going to be basically like that. I like that a lot. That's pretty good. So when you're fitting these in, I've found it helpful to kind of put one side in and then slide the other side on, and look at that. Oh, that looks so good. So then, when we're crimping, you don't want to crimp up here. You don't want to crimp all the way down here. It's kind of like it's almost like halfway. You could do halfway. I like doing a little bit further to the opening of the connector. So we can go ahead and load that up in our jaws. Get the orientation just right. So it's gonna be on our battery like this, and come around like this. Yeah, I think that's gonna be really good. So I like that a lot, because right now you can adjust the clock of it. So now is to get that right. So we can do it like this. Yeah, all right. I just want to make sure that both of these surfaces are flat, which they are. That looks amazing. So I can make sure that's fully on, which it is. Open up fully our tool. Put it in his jaws, making sure that it doesn't twist on you or fall out. And then just apply pressure. Like that. Crimp it up, open it up, and look at that. That is textbook perfect. Look at that. I can't even pull it apart. That is no way you can pull it apart. It is squidged on there. Oh yeah. And then the coup de grace. Yeah, look at that heat shrink. It's a little long. Admittedly, I would probably cut that, but you can slide it down quite a ways like that, so it hides more of the connector, because I know for a fact on the one we have, this will stick out a little bit, and I don't want that touching anything. So the further down we there we go, yeah. Okay, actually, you know what? I like the length of that heat shrink better. I want it to look like this. Now I can get my heat gun. So I'm just gonna apply the heat very evenly. Or, of course, you could use a lighter or something like that if you didn't have one of these. Link down below in the description if you'd like one. Be careful though, they are deceptively strong. Shoot, you can even use a hairdryer. And look at that. Oh, yes sir. It's ready for the car. I already put the car side on, off camera. I have my fuse here, my mega fuse for the car. It even has mounts so you can, mount it somewhere. I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna kind of let mine be supported by the cable itself. And that's part of the fun of having a hot rod, doing it the way you think is gonna be good. So we can go ahead and put the associated hardware on there. And I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that down. Mine's a 13 millimeters, yours can be different. There we go. Want that pretty snug. Making sure it's sitting in its housing well. That is excellent. And then we can also put the battery side of the equation on there. There we go. And we can just put our lock washer and our nut on there. And there we go. There's kind of our finished product. So before you even put the battery in, we need to put the cover back on. And why that is if this side bonks to the body or something like that, it's gonna short this length of wire out and your car is gonna burn to the ground anyway. So it's really important that you put the cover on your big fuse holder like that. See how nothing can touch that? Nothing can get in there. It is just excellent. That's what you're looking for. So I've replaced our battery, and this is what our final product is going to look like with our inline fuse holder, and you can just replace that fuse instead of replacing your whole darn car. That is insanely important. Make sure you do it. And again, the links are down below in the description. And do not attach the negative just yet. We're not ready to energize the car. We're going to leave it off for right now. I'll tell you when to put it on. So now that the battery is all wired up and basically ready to go, we can worry about wiring the rest of the car. And this is essentially everything you need. I apologize if I've forgotten something. I'll go over it later if I have, and we can go over everything right now. That is on my cart here. The main backbone of your wiring harness is going to be this. This is an official kit from Painless Performance sent over by our friends at Summit Racing, and the link is down below in the description. Now, pay really close attention to which one of these bad boys you get. Ours happens to be out of an 01 Silverado, so it's like an earlier style. It has the 24 tooth reluctor wheel, not like the 53 or 52 tooth one, I forget. There's two. There's one with many and one with fewer. We have the fewer. And you can actually call their tech line right here. It is right there for your convenience, and you can ask them, hey, I have this engine with this reluctor wheel, and I have a throttle body that has, drive-by wire or cable or whatever your setup is. That's going to be bespoke to you. So this is the kit we have selected for ours. So this is going to be the backbone. That is a super cool kit. And again, the link that I have down below in the description is to the one I'm using. Yours might be different, so pay super, super close attention on that. And to hook into our wiring harness is this ECM. I know it doesn't look like much, but this is actually the ECM that was ran on the dyno. See all the writing on it? Basically denotes what it has been set up for. So it's been set up for the fans come on at 170 degrees Fahrenheit, what injectors were running, and the date it was set up. The security has been disabled on this, and the input for the gear and the tire isn't there. But that only matters if you have a transmission that is compatible with this ECM. Ours isn't. It's just going to treat it like a manual transmission. So if you had like a 4L80E or something that has that plug that can connect to this, and we'll go over that later, then that's going to matter, and you really need that to be programmed. Where do you get this is the next question. I got this from a company called Flashmasters, and they needed a VIN number in order to send it out to me. I'm not telling you to do this, but you could just go on a website that has 01 Silverados for sale. And usually, and I'm not telling you to do this, they have VIN numbers so you can check the, vehicle history report. So theoretically, you could do that because you do need a VIN number in order to get that. There are companies that do sell these with security lockouts already there, but you're going to have to get them tuned anyway. I'll leave a link down below in the description to a company that sells them, and if they need a VIN number, you can supply that at your leisure if you like. So there are still more things on my cart, and we're going to go ahead and go over this one that kind of took me by surprise. I was looking in on how to wire this all together, and I sort of assumed the oil pressure gauge was going to be handled through the ECM, and I'd be able to plug a scanner in and see it, and I wouldn't necessarily need a gauge for it. However, that is not the case. It is actually handled by the BCM, which we don't have. So as a consequence, we're going to have to take the switch out of our LS and put, like an old school gauge. And this is sent over by our friends at Summit Racing, and the link is down below in the description. So it's going to be kind of like an old school digital gauge. It's going to look really neat. And then it has the sending unit. Now, if you do get a sending unit, buy the same one it's bespoke to. You can't buy like the Summit unit and expect it to hook up to, I don't know, an odometer gauge or something. They have to be calibrated to each other. So I will leave the link down below in the description to this sending unit as well. And that's what it looks like. It's really simple. And you might notice that this fitting is a lot smaller than the oil switch fitting on an LS, and that's what this is about. And here's an odometer fitting. I think that's a 16.5 millimeter fitting into like an 8th thread MPT. All I know is it's the one you want. And again, link down below in the description to get you taken care of on that. Then we also have to worry about grounding, and that's what this is for. This is a body ground, so you would mount this to the body and connect it to the frame. Our car actually already has one, so I don't actually need that, but I'll leave a link down below in the description anyway. Then I have this, and this is a engine ground. So you also need something to ground the engine because the engine sits in rubber. So you need to ground the engine to the frame somehow, and that's what this is all about. And again, link down below in the description. And you want something big, thick, and beefy like this because it it's gonna handle a lot of current. And if it's too small, it's gonna burn up, and that's no good. And then our final piece, and this again took me by surprise. I kind of thought this was going to be included in the wiring kit, but it isn't. And this is sent over by our friends at Summit Racing, of course. And these are coil harnesses. So this will connect to the wiring harness from Painless, and this will go into each one of our ignition coils on each side. They're even, you know, labeled odd and even. And I think they look really, really nice. And the link is down below in the description. So let's get started on our wiring journey. So we're underneath the car now, and where you can see, where you're looking is actually the driver's side, and I chose the driver's side because there's not a lot going on here, and it looked like a perfect place for a mount. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in for you. And we can see the problem. You wouldn't even need a ground if it wasn't for this rubber here. This engine isolator is actually what kind of protects the frame from the engine moving or vibrating or torquing. So that is what provides it with a more supple ride. Now, if you have solid motor mounts, you know, some people make them and they're just out of metal and it's a rougher experience, but it's more, you know, racy, more drag racy, and you don't need one because it's connected by metal. The engine is sitting in rubber. It sits here in rubber. It sits on the other side in rubber. The transmission sits in rubber. It all sits in rubber. And if you don't give it a ground to go through, it's going to find one, and you're not going to like the results. So this is completely very, very important. So we can grab 14 millimeter, and I'm just gonna take this off. And this can be basically anywhere on the engine block. I really don't like using cylinder head or anything like that. I like to use the actual engine block itself. And then you can go ahead and grab my ground I showed you guys earlier. Make sure it fits. Yep, fits perfect. And I'm just gonna leave it loose for right this moment. So that way I can get the clock just right. So I can move that around. Look at that, that looks great. And then, if you wanted, you could put it anywhere on the frame, but I saw here, right on where the motor mount actually goes through and connects to our frame stands, and that looks pretty good, and there's no reason that shouldn't work, so I'm gonna do it. All right, so that looks pretty good. Get our washer out of there, and then we can just put our ground on. And you want to orientate it in such a way that it can't, you know, interfere with something that moves, like the steering rack, or, you know, maybe a serpentine belt if it's really long, depending on your, you know, your situation. Because some people put them on the very front of the engine. It just depends on where you have room, what's going to make most sense to you. There we go. That looks pretty snazzy. And we can set back and admire our work. You know, it kind of looks like it on camera, but there's a lot of room between my hand and the steering rack here. It can't actually touch anything or get in the way. You could even zip tie it through here if you want to. That's fine too. As long as you have this nice solid connection from the engine block to the frame, this is looking nice. So I was looking around the underside of the car and noticed the car actually already has a body ground. So this ground here is grounding the body to the frame. So I don't need to install one. Look around on your car, because chances are, even if the engine's gone, obviously, it probably still has a body ground, but if it doesn't, go ahead and install one just like this. Make sure it's a nice, good connection, or else anything you ground inside of the body won't be grounded, it won't work right, the car won't work right. This is insanely important. So every time I put a wiring harness in a car, I always lay it out on the ground. And this is to give my brain an idea of how long I have on this harness, especially in a custom application like this. Typically, if you're just replacing it, you have an exact fit like I have on my Camaro. You just bolt the fuse block where it went on the stock car and bing, bang, boom, you're in business. This, teensy bit different, because it is a custom application car. We're building a custom car here, and that's super, super cool. But as a result, we have to pay extra attention to what we're doing. And you can see that this length is not super long, so it's not like you could put the ECM in the trunk unless you made these wires longer or something, which I don't advise doing. And we can see that this is gonna go through a grommet in the firewall right here. This is gonna be kind of where it comes out, maybe a little bit closer this way. And then everything, that's what's cool about these aftermarket kits, instead of trying to get one off of like a, you know, a junk car or something at a junkyard, they're labeled. Everything is labeled, like right here in Noxons, we don't have that because our car's cool. Here's your grounds labeled, but you know, black wire is usually a ground. Starter relay, there's another good one right there. So all of that is going to our engine. That's why I have my little toy engine here. So you know, engine, main power for the car. And then we have this breakout, and this is only for a transmission if you have a 4L80E or something like that. You just plug these two in and this main and boom, your transmission knows when to shift. It's going to interact with the computer, and you're going to be good to go. That's super, super, super simple. We're not going to do that because we have a Turbo 350. It's not going to work. Down at this end, we have our OBD2 port. Yes, it does have one, and even a check engine light way down here, and that's going to go inside the car. Our main fuse block. Some people put these, you know, underneath the dash or whatever. We have a special place. I'll show you exactly where we're going to put that. We have our ECM, our main connectors for that, an air pump system, which we're just going to leave abandoned because that's not a part of our hot rod. That's more of like a stock replacement application. And then you have your associated relays and fuses that go along with that. So I'm underneath the engine bay, and this is part of the artistry. This is part of the fun of building a hot rod, as you get to pick where you're going to mount this bad boy. Now, I've looked underneath our car, and the engine's already a pretty tight fit, relatively. I mean, if you had like a big, you know, an old school truck, I'm sure there's plenty of room, but on our sweet little Bel Air here, there's not a ton of options. I mean, I've seen people put it on the fender. I don't really like that. And, you know, maybe over there where the fuel regulator is. Oh, I don't know about that, because it's not just the ECM you got to worry about in this case. Imagine the ECM mounted somewhere, and then a bunch of wires coming out of the bottom of it. So you really have to consider what that is going to look like, and do you want a ton of wires in your engine bay, or do you want to be a little clever? And I'll show you what I mean. So what I mean by that is I was looking around the inside of our car, and you know, there's really not a great place underneath the dash. I don't really want to mount it on the floor or anything like that, but then I saw the glove box. Admittedly a small glove box, however, I noticed that her ECM, by some shadow of a miracle, fits in there perfectly, and the thing closed. It's like GM knew back in the 50s that ECMs needed to fit in there. It's the perfect size, and I just have to take advantage of that because it is just so killer. So I've removed the inner glove box liner, and this is just some pretty sturdy cardstock. And for those of you, you know, sympathetic to original parts and me modifying them, this was actually made in 2005, March 6th, it says so right there. So it's not an original part. I have no guilt about that. So I've cut the back with just a rectangle. I slid my ECM in there, and check it out. Now, my wiring harness goes right to there. I can fish this up through the back of the dash, screw it in its home, and our ECM's technically installed. Okay, so we have our clever ECM, cleverly hidden ECM in here. And we're going to, it's okay if it, you know, gets a little jiggled because we can manipulate that into where we want it to go. And this actually slides like this under the dash. Takes a little bit of finagling. All right, so I put all the screws in for the liner and the glove box door. Really simple, straightforward stuff. A little awkward. I can just kind of pull my cables down below until my ECM finds its new home in its glove box. Look at that. And now we can just close this and we don't need to open it again. ECM installed. So we have our wiring harness coming in from our ECM down this way, and we can see that we have our transmission hump and an access panel. You're probably not going to have that. I'm not going to lie to you. You are most likely going to have to pop about a 1/4 or 1/2 inch size hole somewhere in your firewall, and where that is going to be entirely dependent on you and your car and your aesthetic and what you're going for. However, I noticed that GM's already provided me with a quick access panel. What I'm touching right now is actually the back of the transmission. On the tops of my fingers, you can see daylight. And that goes all the way up to the back of my engine. I think that'll look really snazzy, so I can feed my wires through there and then just cut a notch out of this and put the grommet around it. I'll be made in the shade. So I'm gonna go ahead and feed all my necessary wires up to my engine. So I'm sitting in the engine compartment, and I've already pulled all my wires through that go to the engine. And you can see way down there, that's where we were earlier. And I just pulled these through, really easy. And now, it kind of looks like a mess, but it's not. I'm going to show you exactly where everything goes. So we're here on the back side of the engine, and this is our oil pressure switch. This is the stock original unit. I foolishly thought it was going to be included in our ECM and our wiring harness. It isn't. Apparently it's handled by the BCM, so it needs to be removed. And I've already loosened it with the special socket, and the special socket link is down below in the description for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that, my fingers. There we go, that's what it looks like. Make sure the washer comes with it on the end of the threads right there, or beginning of the threads, however you want to look at it. And then we can grab our fitting, our special brass fitting that goes from 16.5 to 1/8 inch MPT, and that too has a nice brass washer there, and we can make sure that's not cross-threaded. Oh yeah, that's perfect. That is excellent. So we're just going to bring that down. Very cool. And this actually does have torque spec. It came with the fitting, and we're going to grab a 22mm socket and put it over there, and the torque spec is 25 foot-pounds, and it says very implicitly in instructions not to over tighten. So I'm gonna go ahead and just believe them. And there we go, that easy. Now we can go grab our sender and put that in as well. So now we're going to start working on things that are on the back side of the engine, like the map connector and the cam connector and the oil pressure gauge. So the first thing we're going to do is plug in that cam connector. We're going to come on in. You guys can see what I'm talking all about. Yeah, this guy right here, we got to plug him in. So we got to find that. So this is labeled CMP from our kit. And that just plugs in right here. There you go, looks nice. Here's our oil pressure sender, and you might notice on the end of it that it's a little bit longer. And that's because I noticed when I put this on straight onto the adapter down here, it was actually crushing the connector for the cam sensor, and that's no good. So I put a little bit of just an extension, link down below in the description. It's just 1/8 inch MPT, so you can find that pretty much anywhere. You can probably find it at your local hardware store, but I'll leave a link just for you. So we're just going to start tightening that down, and as soon as it starts to get even just a little tight, don't try to screw it on using the body of the gauge. I know it's like really tempting to do it. What we're going to do is take a 17mm crow's foot wrench, because it's pretty tricky working back here, and we're going to use that to tighten her down. Nice and snug, ready to be wired. So I notice under my dash, by some miracle, there's already a gauge holder mounted to the underside of the dash, and honestly, I think it's in a good spot. There was an ancient coolant temp gauge there that I've already removed, and I'll leave a link down below in the description to a gauge that's going to work for you, or a gauge holder that's going to work for you. Basically, gauges come in two sizes, big and small, basically, most of the time, rule of thumb. And this looked like the smaller size, and it is, so what we can do is remove the crossbar off the back of our gauge, feed our wires through, and then put our gauge in, and look at that. Again, it's like it's meant to be there. And then we can put our crossbar on the back and secure it with those two nuts. All right, and as you're coming down on the tightness, make sure you get the clock of the dial just right, how you want it. I'm just gonna go for as level as my eye likes, and then tighten that down, and check that out. That looks awesome. Now all we gotta do is wire it up. So I already have a great deal of the gauge pre-wired. The purple wire and the black wire are going to a nice sturdy ground. That actually grounds the entire fuse panel, so I know that ground's good. And I have the purple wire with the black wire because I don't care if the gauge dims. If you want it to dim, go ahead and run that purple wire up to your headlight switch, so when you flick it on, it knows to dim the LCD by 50%. Now, turn your attention to these orange and black wire. That would be this guy and this guy. That's orange and like tan, and this is orange. So what I've done is I've ran them up and behind the steering column, and they come back down. And the keen observer might notice that now it's orange and yellow, and that's true. I didn't have any black and tan wire in stock, so that is now yellow. So we have orange and yellow running down to our kind of gaggle wires for our wiring job, and that's going down and under and up to the engine to our oil switch. So this is what the wiring in the car looks like so far. It looks pretty darn good. I have most of the wiring. I have almost all the wiring for the ECM coming down. The fuse relay is right here. Don't worry, this is actually metal, not plastic. You want to mount that into metal. And then I cut a big chunk out of our plate here. Normally, you're going to have to drill a hole, pretty good size hole. I believe it's an inch, and maybe it's 1.25 inches, and then you can put your grommet around and then feed the wires through. I think this will do just fine for mine. And then what I have as well is this wire, is your purple wire that we saw earlier. It's this one. And that purple wire is going from the key. This is the trigger wire that's eventually going to go to the starter. It goes from the key down and to our neutral safety switch, so I have that poking there out of the carpet, that would be that one. So that comes there, and then when this neutral safety switch gets interrupted, the car can't start. So you do that as a safety feature. And then this wire, that's a little bit lighter shade of purple, is running back underneath the carpet and to our starter. So we need to go hook that up. We need to hook up our main power, but this is off to an awesome start for our LS kit. These are important as well. These are, one of these, I believe it's this one, is the old power for our coil, and we'll be able to figure that out later because we need this to finish wiring up our oil gauge as well, but I need to be able to turn the key on to see if this gets power when the key comes on. So a little bit of trial and error. So now our sender is nice and tight. We can go ahead and wire it. Remember, from inside the car, I kept orange the same, so we just know that orange is orange. That's easy. And orange goes on S. We can put that eyelet on there and then tighten down, you know, this sort of wire nut thing. Just make sure that both of them don't touch one another. So when you're tightening it, move the eyelet in such a way that it won't be able to touch the other one, because if they touch, you'll get inaccurate readings or short something out. Who knows? Always the fun. Make sure that's nice and snug, which it is, and process of elimination. Our yellow wire, or inside, I believe it's orange with a tan stripe, whatever I converted it to. Converted from, rather. Snug that down, and kaboom! Our oil pressure gauge is done. So the next thing we can talk about is our MAP sensor that is located at the rear of our intake manifold. MAP stands for Manifold Absolute Pressure, and you absolutely have to have one plugged in for your LS to work. So, what does that mean? Why is there two pigtails here? Well, our new MAP sensor is actually for like a 2014 Silverado, and as far as our wiring harness knows, we have an 01 Silverado, and apparently GM changed that connector. So that is the new one just there, and the link is down below in the description. I've already spliced in. Here's our old one. You can see they're just slightly different. And you might be asking me, well, how do you wire it up? And that's a fair question. Because you can't just like flip both connectors over like this and be like, oh, well, you know, 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 2, 3 goes to 3. It's not true. Here is the actual breakdown, and you can see that ours doesn't have colors on the wiring, so you have to go based off position. So to break it down, green on our harness goes into the rightmost spot on the connector. Orange and black goes to left, and gray goes to middle, and all those values are the same. So then we can plug in our MAP sensor, and it should work, and everything should be good to go despite using a newer MAP sensor. So here's our MAP sensor right next to our fuel line, and we can just slide that on. It should just click into place. Just like that. Make sure it's not going to fall off of there. And it isn't, it's very good. And we can just store the wires sort of down in a way so you can't really see them. So it'll look a lot snazzier, a lot nicer. So now we're underneath the vehicle. I'll give you a nice little frame of reference. Here's our bottom of our engine, our transmission. Here are some wires that came off the back of our ECM and our key and our crankshaft positioning sensors. Let's get into exactly where those go. So this wire right here in my hand that I have curled and doesn't have an eyelet on it or anything. This is the main power from the car. This is typically going to be original. Mine doesn't. I cut mine off because it wasn't quite long enough. It had a weird end on it. I didn't like it, so I redid it with this nice, I think this is 12 gauge wire. You can get this anywhere. This is the main power for the Bel Air. The Bel Air, you know, lights and fan, you know, HVAC fan, that's all going to run off of this guy here. This is zip tied and has eyelets on it already. This is what actually came off the back of our ECM. This runs our ECM and all the things that entail that. This is from Painless Performance. This purple guy, this is what comes down from our neutral safety switch. This is our purple wire on GM. Usually it's a purple wire, so look for that guy. That can also be original if you're using your original transmission, but if you're doing a little bit of a swap like us, you might have to run it a little bit differently, and you can change the lengths and everything. I like to keep it purple for continuity's sake. And then this is exclusive to LS's, in this placement at least, is your crankshaft positioning sensor. This has to be plugged in with the starter out of the way. Maybe if you're some sort of, you know, bendy man or something, you could get it in there, but it's pretty hidden behind the starter, so I advise just taking it out. It's really quick and easy, and we're going to plug that bad boy in first, and then we can run power with all the rest of our stuff. So there is our crankshaft positioning sensor on the side of the engine block. We put that in on our build series, just to give you a little frame of reference. And we can plug that in. It is absolutely essential for the LS to run. Don't worry so much about the routing right now, because we can always change that later as long as it's not going through anything, which this isn't. So check it out. Wait for it. Oh yeah. Before we put our starter on for the final time, we have to talk about how the car is going to gain power from the charging system, aka the alternator. And the way it's going to do that is this pre-made wire I've already made. It's just a 10 gauge wire I got from Lowe's and put some terminal ends on. It's about, I don't know, 1.5 feet, 2 feet long, something like that. And that's going to vary where your alternator is. If it's on the other side of the engine, it's going to be longer. Just run it so it can reach the starter. You know, the power lug we're going to put everything on. This will energize your battery and keep your charging system charged. So what are the other things on my cart here? Well, these are just regular relays. You can get them off Amazon. They're really inexpensive. You only need the 4-wire ones. I have 5-wire ones, but I de-pin the middle one so they act like 4-wire relays. And all you need to know about a relay is it is something that turns a small electrical signal, such as the fans off of our ECM, into a big electrical something to happen. So the actual fan motor's on the backside of our radiator. And if you want a whole video on how to wire a relay and how it works and why you want one, the link is down below in the description. I did a whole video on that, and then I'll tell you exactly how they work and why you want it. And then we're also going to fuse our fans, the power for our fans, with this 30 amp inline fuse holder. That's just to make sure if anything happens, the fuse pops instead of the wire, you know, catching fire, combusting, or any kind of meltdown situation. So, and the reason I'm talking about them together is we are going to power our fans. The big power is going to come off the back of our alternator, and I want to kind of do that all in one go, and then I don't have to keep taking things back apart. So come with me to the back of our alternator here. Here's our power lug. This is how power is fed to our car, and we need to run that to our starter. And like I said, I'm also going to run the power for our fans off of here. Instead of having like a bunch of wires coming off the starter, we're going to minimize that, and I think it's going to look really sharp. So we can go ahead and remove the nut on there. Then we can place our power wire on the bottom so it has the most connectivity. Nice. And notice I've picked eyelets that fit snugly over there. It's not like really loose and jiggly. And then we have our inline fuse holder that I've already connected to this orange wire. And I have a 30 amp fuse in there. Should be plenty, but if it grounds out, it'll pop and save my car. So we can go ahead and put that on. And don't lay them on top of each other like this. You really want to clock them so they lay down nice and flat like this. And then we can put the nut back on. And then rotate them down and in a way that they're kind of hidden so they look, you know, really mint. You can also get some electrical tape and wrap these up so they're, you know, black and match the engine. It looks really sharp. I'm going to leave them bare. And again, that's your personal preference. You want to do that? I encourage it because it'll look really cool. So when you're tightening this, this is sitting in either porcelain or some sort of composite plastic. Long story short, it's fragile. Don't tighten it too tight. Like that's seriously enough. And then don't forget your rubber boot. This is super important because if anything that's grounded from the engine, who knows, touches that, you'll have big problems. So make sure we put the boot back on there. So now I'm under the vehicle with a gaggle of wires. Don't worry, I'm going to explain what each and every one of them does. So this purple wire is our trigger. This is what tells the starter, hey, work. So that is not going to be joined with all of these different red ones. So that's what kind of sets it apart. This big, thick red one is from our battery that ran up the length of the car you saw earlier. This one is the main power feed for the Bel Air. So this is going to power our accessories, lights, things like that. These two guys go to our ECM. So this is going to be powering our ECM. And this in my right hand is the one you saw on the back of the alternator. So all the red ones need to be bolted to the back of the starter. I'm sorry if it's a bit cumbersome. It's really difficult to show you because my hands are going to be in the way, but I will attach everything to the starter the way it's going to be, and I'll show you how that looks. So I have all my powers hooked up. Truth be told, you could probably combine a couple of these eyelets to get the stack to be not as tall, but I got the nut on there and it is wrist tight. If you hear a cracking noise when you're tightening that up, that means you've broken the porcelain inside of the starter and you need a new one. It will not work without that insulator. Also, when you're tightening the purple wire here, make sure that the purple eyelet and the power never touch. If those two touch, unbeknownst to you, the starter will just work. And if that's while it's running the engine, you could damage things. It's not good. Make sure that the purple and the red never touch. Like mine is right here. It looks absolutely perfect. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace the starter. It's two 13mm bolts, and we'll be all done here. So here's what our starter looks like back in its home. Just make sure that none of the red wires are grounding out on the block or anything that's metal. And it kind of doesn't look like it on camera, but in person, trust me, there's plenty of room. So the starter is put to rest and done. All right, so I'm on the back side of my core support here, and I'm thinking this will be a perfect place to mount my fan relay. Look at that. Yeah, I think that's gonna look great. And yours could be different. You can mount them wherever you please. And you can just run the wires and you're good to go. Kind of the fun of building your own hot rod is deciding where you want something. And I think this is gonna be just perfect. So what I can do is grab a Tech screw and my electric impact driver, line it up where I think it's gonna be good, and hit go. That looks pretty nice if you ask me. I can do the other one as well. Because remember, I already joined the grounds together. That's going to help me later. And I've also put an eyelet where I've joined the grounds, see? And I can run that to a ground later. And that will save me further headaches down the line. And you know, they don't have to be super perfect, but I want them to be at least level to each other. Yeah, I think that's going to be pretty good. Oh yeah. So here's our relays wired up. You don't have to understand how it works if you just follow exactly what I've done here. Our yellows go to the fan, which is interesting on our fan because the power is actually black and not blue. Blue is ground on our fan over here. And then our blue and white off the relays, for both of them, are being fed into our orange big power from the alternator. And then our green and blue wire from the ECM are fed into the grounds for each individual relay. It doesn't matter which one goes where, they just have to be separate. And then we have our blue wire coming off of our fan right there, and that's attached to ground. I'll show you that right now. So here's the blue wire on this side of the core support, and I fed it through just to any good sized ground, and these are our grounding wires off of our fans. So for our particular situation, black is power and blue is ground, and that might be different for your application, so go ahead and double check that info. But now we can move on. The only other thing I have to do is grab my electrical tape and continue wrapping this up so it looks nice and tidy. Here are the grounds from the ECM. Notice I'm on the top side of the engine now. These are the grounds that come off the back of the ECM. That's part of our painless kit. And it says to ground it somewhere on the engine block. That's what we're gonna do, right on the back of the cylinder head. I already have a bolt fitted through all three of the eyelets, and you're not really gonna be able to see me put it on, but it's gonna go right here where my ring finger is, behind where our breather is. And you know, just take my word for it. Put those on because you're not gonna be able to see me do it anyway. So right there on the end of my ring finger, the grounds are all nice and tight to the back of the head. Again, sorry I couldn't show you. It's all kind of just darkness and fingers back here, but that's what the end result should look like for your negative ground. So underneath the vehicle now, and why that's important is see our gray wire right here in my finger. We drop that down. That is our fuel pump wire, and I've ran it alongside our big power cable and our fuel line all the way back. And again, how you route that's up to you, as long as it's away from anything that moves or gets hot. And then it comes down over here and hooks into the red wire of our fuel pump. Remember that way long ago? We're just gonna tuck that away, zip tie that in place so it can't, you know, hit the diff or something crazy like that. And then right here, this is the ground for the sender, and I have polished off a space on the body. And then this is the ground for the fuel pump, and you can just hook it to the same ground on the body as long as that's a nice shiny piece of metal like mine is, and then your fuel pump's wired. Okay, so here we are at the top of the engine again. Now we've saved basically the easiest part for last, and I've kind of a rough approximation of where I want things to be. So driver's side coils are on the driver's side, our odd injectors are over here, our mass airflow sensors over here. It's basically laid out roughly how I want it. Right now is the time to make those changes, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put everything underneath the intake manifold so it looks all hidden and really sleek. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then we can start plugging things in. And yours might be different. Your alternator could be over here, it could be down low, who knows? And that's gonna be bespoke to your hot rod, so make the proper accommodations. But before I run that, a quick word is that these injectors are more the modern style, and the harness is like the old school style. So they do come with adapters. I'm just gonna go ahead and plug all those adapters in till you feel a nice click and it doesn't come apart. So I have a little bit more length on the injector wire, and it's gonna make it running it underneath the intake a lot easier if I plug them all in now. So now I've run my wiring harness underneath my intake manifold. This is literally how easy it is to plug in your fuel injectors. 1, 3, 5, and 7. It's really that easy. And just tuck them kind of down in a way so they look nice. And how nice you want it to look is going to be entirely up to you. It'll be as good as you want it to be. So the next thing we can do is work on our ignition coil harness. Remember, it came with a sub. Remember, it didn't come with a harness on the actual like painless wiring thing. You have to have a sub harness, and this is from Summit Racing I showed earlier. And what we can do is plug these in, and we have the odd side. It says so, odd, which is driver's side. So we can just plug those in sequentially, front to back, just like it says on the literature. Let's make sure it's going in square. Like that. And then we can plug in the harness, the sub harness into the harness. And when you're plugging in your harness, your sub harness to your main harness, make sure you have the right side. So it says driver's side, we're on the driver's side, because otherwise the computer's gonna freak out, it won't be timed right, everything's gonna be wrong. But this is all correct. Just snap it in. Oh yeah. And tuck it down and away. So now we've plugged in our injectors and our coils, just do the exact same thing for the passenger side. And now we can move on to the other things we need to plug in under the engine bay. So now we can worry about these trio of sensors. So up here we have our IAC, and I'm holding it in my left hand, and we can just route that so it looks nice and clean. And again, these are really easy GM type connectors. They should just snap in place like that. And then our coolant temp sensor, we're gonna just put that down and away for right now. What I'm looking for is that. So this is our throttle positioning sensor, this guy with the, roundish connector, and that just plugs on. Just like that. And then mass airflow, very, very important. We can just plug that guy into its home. Yeah, with all those nice clicks. And then you can just kind of ferret the wires down in a way so they look really nice, however you want to do that. You can also wrap them up with electrical tape like I've done on some of the other wires to make everything look really, really nice. And then now we can move on to the coolant temp sender. So our coolant temp sender is on the driver's side, on the head towards the front. We can grab the connector for that. Again, everything's labeled, so it's really easy to map things. And you just plug that in. You can remove this tag as well if you like, or just slide it up or keep it however you want. And the last thing we're gonna plug in over here is going to be our alternator. This is actually what signals the alternator to send the charging system charge, so it's really important to have it because we don't have like a self-winger like we do on my Camaro. You can just kind of, again, put those wires down and away so they look really snazzy. So underneath the dash, we can see our awesome Summit Racing oil pressure gauge. Here's how I have it wired. Then I have our wires that went up to our gauge that I showed you earlier, the GNS wires. Those go all the way up and around and through this wiring loom here, down and up to the gauge. But how do you power the gauge? Well, if you look right here, the red wire to this blue butt connector, it kind of turns into a pink wire. But I hope you follow along. This guy right here, I just found power underneath the dash when I turned the key to the ignition position and spliced it into there. Who knows what that went to? Probably some light bulb. You can also piggyback off of something that turns on with the key, because it's not a lot of power that you're using. So we can probably turn the key on. Now if we've done our job right when we turn the key on, yay, the gauge turns on. As you can see, it's reading 00 because, well, the engine's not running, so that's good. So we've got to talk about wiring the computer. As you can see, we've already wired up pretty much all of it. It's pretty much all of it ready to go, but this wire, this pink wire, you can see I've spliced a little bit of more wire onto it. This is the trigger wire for the computer. Well, this is actually the ECM trigger wire. This wire doesn't like draw a ton of amperage or anything. This is essentially just telling the computer to, hey, turn on and work, it's showtime. So this is actually like a really special wire, and it can be a real pain and a real headache to figure out how you want it to work. This will be in all of your LS application stuff, and it can make your life interesting. This is a mistake a lot of LS swap beginners make, because they'll hook this up to a power they find underneath the dash, like our oil gauge. But watch what happens when I crank the key. Okay, so let's say you hooked up to the same power source as our gauge. So if I crank over the engine, look at that, turns off. So it's on when the key's on, off when the key's off, but it turns off under cranking, and that's to preserve power, because starting an engine is a big job. So it's your job to find something under the dash that turns off with the key, turns on with the key, and stays on during cranking. On an older car like this, I really wasn't able to find anything, but I did find an awesome new solution, and that's to simply put a switch in it. And you might be thinking, well, can't I just run this to power all the time so that way it's just the computer's always on? Ah, you'd be right. Except if you ever want to turn it off, because even if you turn the ignition off from the key, the engine's still gonna run if this has power, because it doesn't know that the Bel Air's off. It knows that the, you know, 01 Silverado this is still on. So we have to manually control that. And honestly, it's probably a good idea to have a secret kill switch somewhere on your cool hot rod. So let's get to work on that. So you join me again at the back of our alternator, and I have some wire, and it's also got an inline fuse. This is a 10 amp fuse, so not very much at all. It's not gonna draw a ton of power, so don't worry about that. I like the fuse in there just in case if this gets grounded out somehow, the fuse goes pop, car doesn't burn to the ground. And I think a good spot where we can get power from is the back of the alternator lug right here. Obviously you can get power from anywhere as long as it's good power. You can even come from the battery and come underneath the car or something like that. But I think this is going to be the easiest and deliver the most consistent power. So before we start loosening it, make sure the battery is disconnected. Take the negative terminal off. We can go ahead and get that 10mm nut off of there. There we go. And we can slide on our new wire with its eyelet. And we're gonna go ahead and snug that guy down. Again, not too tight, because this is sitting in a compositor. Sometimes it's glass. It's probably composite with this newer alternator. Just snug like that is perfectly good. Now what you want to do with this is run it in such a way that doesn't get next to anything hot. I'm thinking underneath the intake manifold towards the firewall, but however you get there is up to you. And again, you can use any powered source you like. I just think this one's gonna make the most sense for me. Don't forget to put on the cap. There we go, and I can run this inside. Alrighty, so what I've done is ran those two pink wires underneath the carpet. This is actually underneath one of the seats. And you can run this anywhere you want. You can put it under the hood, you can put it in the trunk, you can put it on the dash, anywhere your heart desires. I like it kind of hidden because, well, you don't want your car stolen, right? This is a nice safety feature, kind of a built-in hidden kill switch, if you will. And this is gonna prevent, you know, villains from knowing where that is. So I've already wired it in. This is just an interruption switch that I got off Amazon. It's in a nice housing, so it can't like gap on the metal or something. And they don't have to be terribly expensive. The link down below in the description is the exact switch I'm using. And if this is wired correctly and everything works the way I think it does, or it should, you'll be able to hear the fuel pump when I complete the circuit. Oh yeah, we're cruising right along. That is awesome. So the starting procedure is going to be flicking this switch on and then hitting the key. It should start up. Now, when the car's running, you can turn the ignition off. The car's still not going to turn off. What you're going to have to do is come over here and turn it off with this switch. Then the engine will shut off. So it's kind of like a two-stage starting and turning off procedure. But that's the way you have to wire it on this car, because there are no provisions from the key that stay on during cranking, on with ignition, and off when the key is off. So we can move on. Okay. Now when you're sure all your wiring is done and you don't have to take the carpet up again, you can go ahead and put your seat back in. So we're underneath the vehicle now, and you can see the exhaust manifold or header or whatever you have coming out of the head is coming down, and the keen observer will notice that there's nothing hooked up to it. So there's really nowhere where we can put our O2 sensor just yet. It'll probably be like, I don't know, like this or something. And that is going to be up to, you know, your personal preference. Luckily, LS swaps are insanely common, so you could probably find a kit that will work for you and will have the O2 sensor bung installed, and then you can just install your O2 sensor on both sides. But for this video, I wanted to mention that you do need to plug in your O2 sensors for both sides. So there's one, and then you're just gonna kind of have to use your imagination that we have our O2 sensor installed in the exhaust. It's a good idea to install the O2 sensor first and then plug it in so you don't have to worry about winding up the wire. But I will be covering the exhaust in the next video, but for the sake of wiring, because this is technically part of it, I wanted to mention it here. So make sure you have both O2 sensors installed and plugged in, the one on the driver and of course the one on the passenger. So that is how to wire LS in your old hot rod. This is something, honestly, anybody could do. It just takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of time, but it is totally doable and approachable, especially when you already have a pre-made wiring harness that's labeled. That's the benefit of buying a wiring harness rather than trying to find one, you know, and cobble one together out of a junkyard. That is certainly a cheaper way to go, but I have to advocate for the pre-mades because having everything nice and labeled is definitely a big help. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving a like and subscribing. It really helps my channel out. Thank you so very much for watching. Thank you, Summit Racing, for sponsoring this video, and I'll see you next time.